Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am Mariam Al-Mansouri from Fatima bint Mubarak Ladies Sports Academy. In collaboration with the National, I am delighted to be present today with an elite group of doctors, professors, and inspirers in this panel entitled The Pursuit of Wellness in a Wearable-Tech World, that focuses on a wearable technology and how it can be used in the right way in our daily life, and how it can develop the physical and fitness performance. The Fatima bint Mubarak Ladies Sports Academy, FBMA, is a non-for-profit government entity based in Abu Dhabi. The academy, headed by its chairwoman, Her Highness Sheikh Fatima Ptsd bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and it's dedicated to promoting and facilitating women's sports in the UAE. What makes us happier is the response of UAE National women, their great interaction of them and their demand for activities. Even with regard to this webinar, we have received many interactions and inquiries. I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Kelsey Warner. Kelsey Warner is a future editor at the National. Welcome, Kelsey. It's a pleasure to have you today in this one-of-a-kind and beneficial webinar. And for those of you joining us, welcome, and we hope you enjoy this discussion.
Thank you, Mariam, and hello from the National's newsroom in Abu Dhabi. Welcome. Thanks for being here today. So we're in a new year. We're well into a new year. And after a year like the one, I'm thinking last year, we probably didn't get so much into New Year's resolutions, but 2020 really underscored for me personally just how important wellness and health is and how not to take for granted health. So along those lines, I've been sort of obsessed with closing my Apple rings. And I've been wondering actually how useful this sort of activity tracking is and how much tech and innovation really can play a role in our wellness obsessed world. Like, is it useful? Is it relevant? Should I be even using this? So selfishly, I decided to pull together this panel of experts to pick your brains on what's current and what's next in terms of technology and wellness. So I'm going to introduce now our panel, Dr. Madhu Sasadar, Chief Medical Officer from Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi, Dr. Pancho Georgiev, the leader of the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Africa healthcare practice at McKinsey, Ahmed Al-Kubaisi, founder and chief executive of Abu Dhabi's startup Cruise, and Dr. Patrick Nowak, executive director of Future Foresight and Imagination at Dubai Future Foundation. So we've got a startup founder, a futurist, a practicing doctor, and a doctor into the research and working with healthcare providers. So I'm excited this end of experts. To start out, Pancho, I want to start with you. I want to frame this up a little bit, starting with the data. So McKinsey says improving the world's population's overall health may add up to 10 years to lifespan, and that health can certainly be helped with advances in technology. So tell me, what are McKinsey's findings in terms of just tech and innovation and its role in expanding lifespan and this idea of increasing how long we can live?
Well, thanks, Kelsey. I think this is a very, very interesting question. So what we asked ourselves last year was, how much are we leaving on the table relative to the optimal lifespan of human beings around the world? And the way we were thinking about it is, if you think that people can live up to a certain age, if everything goes optimal, then there are a series of interventions that are already available today that we all know of, where we have the evidence for, that if we were to apply them consistently, they would give us more benefit. You were speaking about your circles on your wearable, but other people are looking at their diabetes drugs that they should take, or the exercise that they should do as counseled by their physician or something else. And we all know from personal experience or from other people that we know that there is a delta between what we should be doing and what we are doing. So there is potential there. What if we were to apply everything that we know today? Now, in our research that is looking at that at the global level, we find that about 40% of the years that we are leaving on the table, so to speak, could be addressed by existing interventions that we know of today. 60% of the optimization would require additional innovation. So things that are maybe in the pipeline somewhere, but are not available today at scale. And when you look at the 10 most important ones of these, 5 of them are actually tech solutions, right? So to give a few examples, right, we're speaking about digital therapeutics, AI-enabled behavioral therapy would be one, or e-tattoos, you know, to replace halters that are measuring your heart rate, or exoskeletons, for example, right, to support mobility of people that have impaired mobility. So these are things that are already in the making, but not yet available at scale, that would contribute the rest of this delta, right? So I think technology is going to play a major role for us at the global scale to bridge the gap between what we could achieve in terms of full life potential and what we are achieving today.
It's really interesting. Dr. Madhu, I want to bring you in from a practitioner perspective. So Pancho, thank you for giving us this global, zoomed out view of what's still on the table for us to maximize lifespan. But Dr. Madhu, do you think wearable technology is sort of just a blip on the radar? Is it just a trend, or can it meaningfully improve healthcare for people? In an ideal world, what kind of information might you as a doctor get from all of us tracking ourselves 24/7?
Well, thank you, Kelsey, and thank you for having me. I must tell you that I took my watch off because I'm still in an analog world. But to your question, I'm absolutely convinced that this is not a trend. This is a durable change in how we live and measure our health and how healthcare professionals take care of patients. And in fact, I think that the COVID pandemic may have accelerated some adoption of these techniques. Clearly, more people are comfortable transmitting their data wirelessly to their healthcare providers. Let me just start at a broad overview. If you look at just health maintenance, mobility, exercise, and so on, it is fascinating now that even children and teenagers are using their watch to count their steps and measure their activity. So I think this is a fundamental shift, and as we become more health obsessed and health focused, I think wearables will play a significant role in how healthcare takes care of these patients and how we get data from them. I want to talk a little bit about what Pancho just mentioned, which is some of these leading edge technologies, things that are perhaps in the pipeline and a few years away, but they may give us a glimpse of what we can expect. So let me give you a few examples. Mobility data, how much patients can walk, is incredibly important. In fact, as a pulmonologist, I take care of patients with severe emphysema, and how much distance they can cover in 6 minutes is an incredibly valuable measure of how they will do. In fact, it's better than the most sophisticated tests we have. So if I prescribe a medication or if I change therapeutics for a patient, just knowing how mobile they are at home is an incredibly valuable piece of information for me. And this applies to many other conditions, Parkinson's, for example, which is a movement disorder. And I think some of these use cases, and I think somebody just mentioned this ability to modify or monitor behavioral disorders. I'll give you a very fascinating example of a technology that was approved last year, and this is for patients with PTSD. It's a very debilitating condition, and patients can have very, very disturbing nightmares, and this is a prominent feature of PTSD. It wakes them up, it interrupts their sleep, and sleep interruption is a significant component of their disease, and it bleeds over to the next day. So just using an Apple Watch, we can now look at their pattern of sleep just looking at their heart rate. And the watch can predict that somebody is going to have a nightmare. And what's beyond that is they can actually use the haptic feedback to wake up the patient, just wake him up enough to interrupt this nightmare. This was one of the breakthrough technologies of last year. And it tells you how far we can go, especially in some of these specific disease conditions. So absolutely, I think this is a durable change, and it'll be with us for a while. I think in terms of the kind of information that would be useful for doctors, I think we are looking for more synthesized information, more actionable data, and that will need analytics and artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on.
Ahmed, I want to bring you in as our sort of fearless startup founder, the resident founder here on this panel. So Cruise, your app, aims to get people to socialize more, to be activity-based rather than all of us sitting at home like scrolling on our phones. So what made you think that there was a market for getting us up off our butts and for us to be activity-based and kind of putting the social back in social media, as you have told me before?
Well, thank you for the introduction, Kelsey. The inspiration really came from, day-to-day challenges that I faced between me and my friends and my brother when we want to do sports or participate in any activity. And there were always those hurdles, which is, when are we meeting? Who's coming? What time are we going to be there? Where? So through Cruise, the problem that we set to really solve is, how can we make that more socially interactive? And that's what the platform gives you. It's, and especially in a day like today, the world is changing all the time. This year more than most, but one thing that doesn't change is that people want to connect over hobbies and interests that they love. And Cruise, don't want to try to sound biased, but is the first app of its kind to allow like-minded people not only to engage with each other, but find new passions, explore new experiences, and encourage them to take on these adventures. So as a way of example, let's say, let's assume that I'm from France and I just got here to the UAE. And it's my first week here in Abu Dhabi. And I want to meet like-minded people that are interested in either jogging or paddle tennis or football and so on. The application is going to help you explore people based on the same interests as you and encourage you to go out and experience. It's also going to help you find activities that you can participate in, whether it's from Abu Dhabi Sports Council or Mubadalas tournaments or booking a football court on Al Fursan. That's what the key element that we're trying to solve is. We're trying to streamline the process of getting an individual off of his couch and participating in a certain activity, whether it be a social activity or a sports activity.
Ahmed, for me, what your startup actually is finger on the pulse on in terms of this emerging trend, or a trend that's been around probably for like the last decade, is our wellness obsession, our wellness culture, and just sort of pivoting the value proposition of the social media app is actually one of being activity oriented and not look what I have done, instead look at what I will and what I want to do. It's inherently forward looking, activity oriented. So you're very much sort of part of the zeitgeist right now in my mind. And Patrick, sitting there over at the Future Foundation, you are looking 10, 50, 100 years into the future. And in my mind right now, Fitbits and Apple Watches are great, but they're actually not really living up to their potential. Heart rate monitors, pedometers, all the rest have been around for decades. So what would a world with really awesome wearables look like if we were to make these like actually cool and not like something that's been around for the last 20 years? What would they be?
I think you're right. I got my first pedometer from my grandmother, and that was back in the 20th century. So it'll tell you how old I am. I think the current wearables have a place and have a function because for a number of reasons. One is because they provide a really good monitor of what's happening to our bodies and how we are, how we're working, how we're functioning, what works well, what doesn't work well, and all that. They work really well as a nudge. So they have that ability to nudge you to do more, to do better, to do different, to understand what you're already doing and what you might need to address and have, and therefore just go about in a different way. But there's always that, so it's a unidirectional tool, right? So it picks up signals, it's a sensor, it picks up a signal from your body. That signal, in a sense, goes to your brain, or in the case of my colleague speaker on here, to the doctor, and then an instruction will come and you will need, or you will want to do things differently. I think going forward, we need to think of wearables as bidirectional, so both read and write. Right now, our watches read. In the future, the wearables or the devices will write. They will write to our systems. They will write to our brains. So we've spoken about sleep earlier. The Apple Watch wakes you up when you're going into a phase of the sleep that is causing nightmares. But we will have devices that will get you to a level of sleep that will be restoring and that will be restful and that will get you through the night. So it is an input device. Similarly, there are already, I mean, they're not exactly wearable because a lot of these devices are deep brain stimulation, devices that help people with Parkinson's. We've spoken about extending the lives of people. As you extend lives, neurodegenerative disorders will kick in as time progresses. So while right now, Parkinson's can be mitigated with deep brain stimulation, I think in the future, in decades, and we're talking about decades to come, there will be devices that might be able to stimulate those parts of the brain that are affected by Parkinson's, for example. There are massive advances, and of course, here we're talking not about sports related devices, but really wearable devices that fall into the category of neural interfaces or brain-computer interfaces. But I think the wearables that we have nowadays that we use for sports and for lifestyle, they are transition pieces. They make us get used to having a digital device on our bodies 24/7 almost, and somehow cohabit with them. And the next step of this cohabitation will be the second path of the read and write. So it's not just write, not just read, but also write.
When you think about just the fact that we're wearing watches, just sort of an unoriginal form factor, if you will, for wearable tech, what might a wearable look like or be like in this next phase that you're thinking of?
I'm quite confident. So there's different areas. One, I think the wrist is still going to be an area of our body that is going to be important going forward, particularly if we want to interact with devices, with screens, with computers, and whatnot. Other devices will be certainly close to our heads. So there'll be devices which are a little bit like auriculars, which will go around your ear, so that brain waves can be picked up, or you can send waves into the brain. Helmets or headbands will be the first step, but then miniaturization will kick in, and we'll have smaller and smaller devices that will be less and less obvious and visible. So there will need to be as close as possible to our brains if we're going to interact with our brains. But if we want to interact with our peripheral nervous system, because we may want to type on screens without actually touching any keyboards or any mouse, then they'll be on our wrists. So the wrists and the heads are certainly the areas to watch out for. And we may have lost Kelsey.
Patrick, while we are waiting for Kelsey, if I could just add to what you said, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I do agree with you. I think there are two broad areas where I see the field evolving. One, of course, are sensors. I think we are now just limited to what you wear on the watch, a pulse oximeter and a heart rate monitor and some combination of accelerometers. But I do think that in the future, we will have a broad array of sensors that may feed into a watch or another wearable. I can think of, kinetic sensors that detect a fall, sensors that detect glucose level, potassium levels, EEG signals, and so on. So I do think that the sensor portfolio will expand, and we may select a few of them depending upon what condition you're trying to monitor and what the patient or the person is interested in monitoring. On the other component that you talked about, which is closing a closed loop system, it's actually fascinating because we've been playing with it, and I have some experience in the medical side of using closed loop systems. So even when we have a patient in the hospital, trying to get data, physiological data from a mechanical ventilator, let's say, and trying to figure out a closed loop system has been incredibly hard because the systems today are just not sophisticated enough to deal with the broad range of issues and signals that come through. And of course, the signal to noise ratio is not good either. So I guess that's a second area, that sort of analytics and cleaning the signal and being able to have data that is actionable and feeding it back to the user. I see that as a much more distant outcome, and would love to hear your thoughts regarding that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on both counts. And what is really interesting is I think more and more the devices that we're going to be wearing are going to be part of the Internet of Things ecosystem. And as you rightly say, we may have blood sugar monitors or various blood indicators that are going to be picked up by these devices, and they might just interact with our fridges, right? And the fridge might say, you've got to buy some electrolytes, or you've got to buy some fruit, you've got to, similarly, a fall is likely to be picked up by a wearable device, but it also could be picked up by your television or by your telephone or by your light bulb. So I think we will become, because we are going to wear things more and more, we're going to become an integral part of the Internet of Things ecosystem. On the closed loop system, you're absolutely right. It's incredibly hard to get very good signal to noise and also clean up that noise. But what is really interesting is that a lot of the technology that's available now and that has been available for the last several years has come out of very strictly, I would say, medical and university environments. Whereas in recent years, you see increasingly people from very different fields to enter the area of neural interfaces. And so, you're thinking of, I'm thinking of people like Elon Musk, like Zuckerberg, like the China Zuckerberg Initiative, thinking about Brian Johnson with Kernel. There's a plethora of people spending a lot of money to go about the development of new devices, but also the generation of new knowledge and science in very unorthodox ways. And that, I think, will lead to very new kinds of devices and products. And I think what's important in this aspect is that there are very, very different kinds of markets. One market, of course, is medicine. Another market is sports. Another market is gaming and leisure. And these three different areas will complement each other. So because there's such an amount of money going into the gaming, that advances in that field will support advances in the medical field and vice versa. So it's really important for those areas to come together and for regulation across these new devices and technologies to be able to create or allow a degree of interchangeability between applications.
Fred, I want to bring you in here thinking about leisure activities and gamification and competition, sports. When you think about Cruise, which is right now an app on our smartphones, thinking ahead to different versions, different iterations of your company, might you integrate more gamification, more actual actionable data to get people active?
Yes, of course, absolutely. So the inspiration of Cruise started from sports in the beginning, and getting that data and being able to, play a football game with your friends, knowing how many kilometers you ran compared to your other players. It's a good way to encourage and, foster that competitiveness, friendly competitiveness between you and your friends. If you think of football, it's a competitive sport. That's why we all love it. And you'd always strive to do better and better as you get on with the game. So it's definitely in the works, definitely in the pipeline, but I don't want to bite off more than I can chew. So we're taking it in, gradually in phases.
Sure, understandable enough. So Pancho and Madhu, I want to ask you from a perspective of, just dealing with doctors, insurers, practitioners, do patients look nuts when they bring in user data and try to share it with their doctors? How amenable are you finding the market to taking in user data as something as part of like a holistic healthcare plan?
So go ahead, please.
No, you go, Madhu. Okay. So look, I think you're raising a very, very important question. And I'm sure that Dr. Madhu will have very specific examples of what patients are bringing today. But I think the way we've started to look at it with a lot of the systems and our clients is to go back to what are we solving for the patient, right? And I think fundamentally there is 2 or 3 things that we're looking to solve for in the midterm. So one is, a lot of this is going to enable us ultimately to bring care and maybe wellness much closer to people's homes, right? So to make it more independent from going to a facility and interacting in a facility and an infrastructure. So bringing all of that much closer to home. I think the second thing is to continuously develop the self-care or even autonomous care, right? Patrick was elaborating on some of these examples, as did Dr. Madhu, but self-care, people being able to actually work with themselves, with their devices, with technology on themselves. And the third thing is the reduction of what we call friction cost between stakeholders. So Patrick was alluding to the Internet of Things, but if you think about the stakeholder environment of a patient today, you have a regulator, you have your health insurance, you have your different providers, you have your personal trainer, you have yourself and your device, right? And all of these do not yet really speak to each other. And so what we believe the journey is going and people have started to work on is what we call integrated digital health ecosystems. So if you imagine the power of you being in the center of a patient, it integrates the information from your wearable, it integrates the information from your sports app, it integrates the information from your physician, from what Dr. Madhu is doing with you, the information that is coming from your health insurance, maybe even social data in other systems, right? Behavioral data. You integrate all of that. And I think Dr. Madhu was saying, we need to synthesize the information to make it actionable for the different stakeholders. So I think that's ultimately where we want to get to in the next step. So you not only get your wearable data that you can share with your physician in terms of heart rate, but an integrated view of all the different sources of data that are presented in a succinct way so they're actionable for the different stakeholders. This is really, I think, where we see the journey going over the next few years. Sorry, Dr. Madhu, you were starting to.
No, you're absolutely right, Pancho, and I absolutely agree with you. And Kelsey, we as doctors have been used to looking at data that patients bring in from their home, whether it's a glucometer or blood pressure monitors. And we know, for example, with blood pressure, that measurements that are taken at home are far superior to ones that we take. So that's not necessarily a new idea for us. And I think in addition to physicians and patients, we not only bring patients in as participants, as Pancho said, but also other caregivers. There may be a daughter, a spouse, or somebody who's a caregiver who's able to now participate and has visibility into the data and activities of this person. So I think that's incredibly important. And I think even healthcare entities are working with insurers to figure out how to incentivize even employees, even healthcare employees who are self-insured to be more active and take care of their health. But I don't want to minimize these concerns of privacy. I don't think we've really looked at them closely. It is a poorly regulated space, and that's good for innovation, but there are, I think, legitimate risks around privacy. And then the other thing that I worry about is portability. Today, every vendor has a highly proprietary data system, and data is not easily portable. And that is a concern if we are to have more widespread adoption of these technologies.
Can I just quickly jump in here? I'd like to, I'm so happy, Madhu, that you've mentioned this, because I think this is one of the biggest areas that we need to get absolutely right. The sort of shortage, or this oftentimes gray areas of regulation, allow for innovation to happen very quickly. And a colleague here on the call who's developing his app, I think if it was too tightly closed and regulated, then innovation would not be allowed to happen. But we think ensure that there are a minimum of principles that developers and inventors and innovators apply in developing new tools and methods and software and applications, because it's very easy for such new technologies to be abused, for the data that is generated by them to be used in ways that ultimately is not to the benefit of the end user. And so it's important, as I say, to identify, and for us to collectively as a species understand what those principles might need to be, other than waiting and seeing and then dealing with the fallout.
Yeah, the issue of privacy was one I wanted to bring up next and ask sort of to the entire panel, if you had words of caution for people who are gathering personal medical data about themselves, are there any risks or risks to undue harm that you think about when Dr. Madhu, either from a practitioner standpoint, Dr. Pancho from a risk management standpoint, what are some of like the unseen dangers of collecting personal medical data?
Well, there are all kinds of issues that I think Patrick just alluded to, that we've not even started to think about because we are so focused on the innovative new technologies. For example, my teenager is wearing an Apple Watch, but imagine he has a heart arrhythmia, and thankfully he doesn't. What does that mean for future insurability? Who has that data? Is it disclosable? So I think we rush headlong into these innovations without fully understanding the future implications of this data. We saw during COVID that there was a quick rush to aggregating the data and understanding patterns of transmission of this disease, which was incredibly helpful. It helped us to understand very quickly how this epidemic was unfolding across the planet, and we could right size our resources, ICU beds, PPEs, and so on. But you can also think about a rogue nation or a dictatorial regime using this data in other means for goals that are not aligned with an individual's health needs. So I think Patrick is absolutely right. There needs to be some understanding of what the ground rules are. And I'm sure at some point those things will need to be worked out.
So I think, I mean, first of all, I obviously fully agree, right, that this is an area that is on top of many people's mind that we need to sort out. I think there is one more thing that I personally find very intriguing as a potential risk, or actually a real risk. If you think about the thousands of healthcare applications that we all have access to, and think about what they're actually doing. A lot of them are giving you direct advice on what to do, right? For your diabetes condition, for your hypertension, for whatever it is. Now, a healthcare professional would be licensed by a health authority to do so. A drug would be licensed by the Food and Drug Administration to do so. An app doesn't. So there isn't really a mechanism that we have in place to say that your sugar control app is giving you the right advice, has no mistakes in it, calculates things in the right way, and we somehow trust that the people that are developing it are adhering to all the standards that we've set and are translating that properly into the digital world. So for me, there is a question out there of how are we going to make sure that all of the access to all this technology, that we safeguard the patient in the exact same way that we're doing it when we license a physician or a nurse, or in the exact same way that we're licensing and approving a drug, right? And I think that's a spectrum that is going so fast globally, and we haven't really figured out from a regulatory perspective how we're going to catch up and really make sure that this is safe and sound.
Patrick, I know that you're always the one sounding the alarm on possible future dangers. What are some of the worst case scenarios of wearable technology doomsday scenario?
Oh, future danger. I don't want to kind of scare people off, right? I mean, ultimately, anything that's to do with data and digital is hackable. When quantum computing becomes ubiquitously available, all our digital devices now will just be up for grabs. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything is hackable or everything has some kind of a hackable, sorry, someone's standing over my shoulder here, hackable, that everything has to be hacked, but it's you know, it's open, it's there, particularly as that read-write function becomes available. You know, people will have to really be thinking about if they have devices that are going to influence their mood, their hormonal balance, their chemical balance in the brain, and if those balances could be either upset or regulated or modulated through an external machine, then we really need to be careful of that. But that is, you know, ultimately something for our crypto colleagues to figure out. But it's certainly something that in the distant future we will need to be concerned about. And you know, the insurance business needs to be mindful of the way they're using the data already today. But I think, you know, at the same time, not everything is doom and gloom. There's a lot of really positive outcomes that we're observing. You know, the number of steps people are taking each day because they've got a relatively simple device that tells them, you know, make 10,000 steps and you're healthier, you'll lose weight, your cardiovascular system will benefit and all that. So, you know, there are very real benefits. It's always easy to anticipate the worst. I think it's wise to think about that so that we can prepare for a better future.
Ahmed, I'm curious from your perspective, you're sort of on the front lines of this. Apps were just brought up as patient zero in some ways along the lines of data collection. How cognizant are you of data privacy, user privacy? How savvy are you having to be around what kind of data you're collecting these days?
So, yes, we are a social media application, and inevitably you would have to get that data, but that's for your own benefit, to show you people with similar interests that you can, you know, meet and play and book sports or social activities with. But we abide by GDPR, which is not so recently, but like maybe 2 years ago. We don't have to, because we're not, we're based here in the UAE, but I voluntarily chose to abide by GDPR, which is very stringent in terms of what data we can get and what can we do with that data. And any user on the cruise platform is protected by GDPR's regulation. And there's a lot of, I'd say, misconception and distrust when people talk about data. But the truth is, when, you know, online card payments just started off, nobody trusted that system. I'm not going to put my credit card number or my debit card number on the internet. It's going to get hacked for the first 2-3 years. And next thing you know, everybody's on it. And so I just think it's, and who are you sharing that data with, and who is that platform? There are several, companies that over and over again have fell into scandals with what they did with that data. But I'd say maybe they just give, the market or anyone in that sector a bad reputation. And maybe when it comes to the applications and the technology, we've got a very broad experts in this panel, kind of like a doctor, right? You got one doctor that's a cardiologist, which is focusing on, the heart and another one that's like the other types of doctors, sorry, like an orthodontist and stuff. So where we sit at is really trying to make social media social again. When you have your users on, I can't name some platforms, but the biggest social media applications, what they're doing is they're just watching fake lifestyles, fake trends, very materialistic, unrealistic lifestyles. And that has its effects on, I'd say maybe from a psychological aspect on the user. On the other hand, what we're trying to do with cruises, encouraging people, as you mentioned earlier, encouraging people on what's going to happen tomorrow and what can I join and participate in tomorrow. No user is going to have a use of my application if they just want to sit at home and procrastinate. My application is simply a medium for you to get off your couch and go out and experience, to really socialize. That's at its core and at its heart. Going out, whether with your friends to the beach, playing football, meeting new people, and that's what really we're set to do.
If you're just going to be sitting on your smartphone giving Ahmed data, then cruise is no place for you anyway, is what I'm hearing.
Well, what we do with that data is, again, to let other users, find you.
But you're being really mission-oriented and mission-driven in how you collect that data, which I think is interesting. Mariam, I want to kick it to you. Everyone's heard enough from me. From the Fatima bint Mubarak Ladies Sports Academy, what questions do you have? Unmute.
Yeah, sorry about that. I have one question for Dr. Madhu. Like, for example, in your opinion, what areas of healthcare might benefit from the wearable technology? It's muted.
I think we are catching this from each other. I'm sorry, did you say when will healthcare benefit from wearable technologies?
Yeah, for example, in what areas in the hospital or in the healthcare that wearable technology will be beneficial at it?
Yeah, so we talked about that a little bit earlier. I think the one area that has seen the maximum adoption are wellness programs. Wellness programs can take data from the existing sensors that are built into watches and look at things like mobility and heart rate variability and so on. So I think that's where they are set up to maximally benefit from existing technology and existing platforms. And as Patrick said, these are built for sports. They don't have the fidelity that we would require from a medical grade instrument. So we are not there yet. But I do think, as we talked about before, as the array of sensors expands and that data becomes accessible to healthcare providers, we will see many, many more areas starting to use them, such as neurology, cardiology, and so on.
Thank you so much. Dr. Patrick.
Can I quickly follow up on this?
Yes.
I think as you're speaking from your organization, which is really focused on women, right? Women in sports. I think so. There's two things I'd like to say. One is that the devices that we're wearing now, the wearables that are collecting information, I think it can potentially be really helpful in ensuring that some of the physiological and physical differences between men and women at different ages can be useful in shaping some of the medical interventions or some of the fitness regimes, or just really identifying the differences between men and women in the needs of activities, or as I say, medical intervention. So that is a potentially really useful thing in terms of collecting data that then make sure that applications or medicines are not kind of blanket provided, but are much more tailored. And the other thing, as we're speaking of women, I just wanted to plug this in here, that at the Dubai Future Foundation, and as much as I have enjoyed speaking to my three male colleagues on this panel, we now have a policy, and I think it was mentioned a couple of days ago, we now have a policy that speakers of coming from the Dubai Future Foundation will join panels that have at least 50% female representation. So going forward, we are going to apply that policy. I'm sure that all my female colleagues on this call will be excited to hear.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick. My question to Ahmed Al-Qubaisi. Ahmed, given that Cruise is a social networking platform, how does the wearable-tech world help in those kinds of businesses?
So I'd say the potential would be limitless, I guess, right? It's if we look at it, we can look at it from the individual's perspective, or we can look at it from, you know, the commercial entities' perspective, such as the sports clubs, the sports facilities. Let's take Abu Dhabi Sports Council as an example. What I strive to do is to make it easy for the users to find out about Abu Dhabi Sports Council tournaments and make it super easy to join and participate. And it doesn't only stop there. Once I participate and I buy that ticket, then my friends, my family, all of my followers will know that I joined, and they'll be encouraged to join. So let's say, for example, I buy a ticket to ADNOC Marathon, and next thing you know, Kelsey joins. The next thing you know, Patrick and Pancho, and probably you as well, you'd be encouraged to join us. And when it comes to the wearables, I think it's just a matter of time before we start integrating that into our platform and our technology. So
thank you.
I hope that answers the question.
I have another question for you as well. I don't know if you know the percentage of, let's say, women are interested in wearable technology more than men, or what's the percentage of women than men, maybe from who downloaded Cruise already, like if you have any percentage to share with us.
Yeah, so basically, we actually launched Cruise 2 days ago, and without any marketing, we just crossed 1,000 user download. There are a few optimizations that we need to do with the platform, but I can tell you this, that I'd say 95% of our users are Emirati. And I think it's just, we didn't do any marketing, I just went through friends and family, and that's the segment that it targeted. And I think it's fair enough to say that 50% of those users are women. And they're just excited to start exploring activities and running and cycling. And regarding getting the data on how many of them have the wearables, we don't have that yet, but inshallah, in the coming months, we'll be able to accurately measure those data points.
That's really great. Like from the beginning of the launching of the app, you have a really nice number and percentage. Thank you so much, Ahmed. I have my last question to Dr. Pancho. For example, like, let's say, do you find like any cases that technology helps save lives by measuring let's say heart rates or high blood pressure? They use.
Well, absolutely it could, and I think it could do so much more at scale, right? If you just think about what you have on the health app from Apple, if you're registered there and you measure, there is an SOS alert that can go to emergency services if there is, let's say, heart arrest detected. This is just one example. There are many of these examples that are out there, where I would say this is, in an acute setting, I think we could leverage this much more in terms of signaling when there is a very acute situation, and bypassing several steps of collapsing, people realizing it, somebody calling, etc., through direct links with technology. And a lot of this already exists. I think it's not used by far enough. So I think this is a very, very concrete, acute example. But I think, all the examples that we heard from Kelsey filling her circles in the very beginning of the conversation, Dr. Madhu explaining for his pulmonology patients, the 6 minutes test, all of this is giving us information to allow to either treat ourselves better or caretakers and professionals to take better care of patients. And so ultimately, this should and will, and is probably already translating into longer lives through better information and better treatment. So I think we have it both in the very acute settings with very concrete examples today, but I think also in an accumulated way through better wellness, well-being, and better treatment that it enables.
If I could add also to Dr. Pancho, you're absolutely right. And the other anecdote that I hear, which I'm always surprised by, are young people who have irregular heartbeats. Congenital heart diseases causing irregularity is not uncommon. And the number of them that have been diagnosed after they got an Apple Watch and noticed that they were having irregular heartbeats, and that prompts a visit to a cardiologist. And sometimes it's a small cardiac procedure that can permanently take care of this irregular heartbeat, which in some instances can even be deadly. So there are those examples of these extreme cases where people come to attention early because of an Apple Watch or similar technology.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
And I have one last question. Mariam, thank you very much. I'm going to leave the last word to actually Dr. Madhu. So Ahmed, we can find your app on the Apple Store, and
yes, that is correct.
So find Cruise on app stores now as of 2 days ago. Congratulations. Dr. Patrick Nowak is a regular columnist actually to the National, so he shares his futuristic views with us monthly. Thanks for being here. And Dr. Pancho, lovely to meet you, working behind the scenes to give us good healthcare insights. So Dr. Madhu, last word. Do you recommend listeners on this panel right now go out and implement wearable technology into their lives? And if so, what should they be paying attention to?
I think absolutely. I think everybody's use case will vary quite a bit. But I think, as Patrick and others talked about, it's the ability to nudge oneself. It's a form of biofeedback. And the way you incorporate this into your life is you use that to see where you are and where you want to be and the gap. Because feedback is extremely valuable to all of us, and we as humans tend to act on feedback. And these devices are extremely powerful forms of feedback for us. And that's the way we should incorporate it. And I think the goal should be, as you said at the start of the conversation, Kelsey, it's 2021, time for a fresh start, and let's all set up a goal for a healthy 2021.
That sounds excellent. And as you're saying that, I'm looking down and my circles are far from closed. So on that note, thank you all for joining us today. I hope you learned something. And thank you, Dr. Pancho, Dr. Madhu, Ahmed Al-Kubaisi, and Patrick Nowak. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you. And congratulations, Ahmed.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks all. Bye-bye. Have a great year ahead.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.